Hey, welcome
Hey.
back. Welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
Welcome
Hey.
back.
Well,
Welcome back,
I've got
everybody.
that. I've got that
Welcome
feeding.
back.
Well,
Welcome back,
I'm worried about
everybody.
it. It's YouTube. I got it feeding on YouTube. All right. There we go. Yeah. I think we're gonna be good here in a sec here.
Not letting me rehost your video.
Am I on Twitch?
Oh, are you? Maybe that's the problem. Are you planning on going on
It
Twitch?
should be. Yep. I'm live right now.
Are you
Weird.
planning on going on
It
Twitch?
should be. Yep. Yeah, I was switched right back.
There we go.
Are you
I had to
hosting
actually,
me?
yeah, I had to click the button. I couldn't just press return. I had to click the chat button. Oh, Xandrax! Hey, buddy, Seth. You know, two things on YouTube live streaming. I mean, we're not going to talk about it on the episode tonight, but two quick things. First of all, if you label your channel and your video made for kids, that they will turn off the live chat in YouTube. So that's one thing.
Cool.
And the second thing is I hate live streamers that like the sailing YouTube channels. They're just infamous for it for me. Well, they will do a live stream like once or twice a month or whatever to catch up with everybody.
Yeah.
And it's a super chat so people can donate to them and give them
super chat.
Yeah, give them 5, 10, 15, $50 or something like that. And I think it's really cool. I think it's neat the way they do that, although it's amazing to me how much money actually transfers during these chats.
I agree.
But
it's insane.
What really intrigues me is these hosts, they will look at the chat and they will talk to every new person that comes in. It's like, hey, Seth, how you doing? And they would just talk about Seth for 5 minutes. And Seth, I love you, buddy. I really do. But I'm not going to spend 5 minutes of my show talking about you unless we're prepared to talk about Geekville Radio for some reason.
Now, on the other hand, never mind. I won't make that joke. Let's just gonna say it's a member of my family. If a member of my family came in, you would talk to her all the time. See, I kind of made the joke.
You're okay. I thought you were saying like the better John Drew brother and David. Yeah, of course I'd be like, David, hey, how you doing? But no, you went to the sister route. Okay, yeah, all right. I talked to her too.
Oh, the Trolliversary one thing video. Oh, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, sweet. Cool. Well, I look forward to. Never mind. I was gonna make a comment about blue paint and nothing but blue paint.
Okay. Somebody's been watching The Watchmen.
All right, I guess we should get this show going. Are we on Spreaker?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Well, do you want me to be on Spreaker?
No, we don't have to be on Spreaker.
It's ready to go. I mean, if you want me to press start or go live.
I think I forgot to load a pre-roll again. Let me get a pre-roll loaded again. Yeah, fix that on here too.
Need a new pre-roll. When are we going to get a new pre-roll?
I've only had the other one for like a year.
No, I mean like a new somebody recording a new pre-roll.
Oh.
When we're going to get that?
Yeah, I'll start a new shit podcast.
Well, that's kind of what I'm asking.
Why don't I start a new podcast?
Well, go ahead. We've talked about it for a while.
All of my time.
I
put it off all of 2019. 2019 was the year I started that podcast, and we know that didn't work out.
Seth knows that, Starling Tribune's been fun for us for years and years and years, but I've been doing 4 podcasts for a long time. I need something needs to drop, and with Arrow ending, Seth, you're going to get all my listeners, man.
Cool.
All of them. I don't even know if he's listening anymore.
Johnny's watching. He got home. Yay, Johnny.
Oh, we can start now.
Johnny, we were waiting for you.
We waited 8 minutes for him.
We were waiting. Perfect, Johnny.
All right. Let's go.
Let's get this show on the road. Should we get the show on the road? Should we do the road show?
What does Optimus Prime say?
I have the power. Oh, wait, that's He-Man. Speaking of Seth, that probably irritated the hell out of you, Seth, didn't it? All right, let's do this.
I'm Kier from In Defense Of, a fandom inclusion and community podcast that's part of the Gun and Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on this network are individually owned, and the opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other really interesting geeky shows at gunandgeeknetwork.com.
Oh, I screwed up. That's my bad. Sorry. My bad. My bad.
I am Barbara Walters, and this is 2020. Welcome to episode 214 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we talk about what makes a likable podcast host.
In this week's Better Podcasting Download, we discuss a breakout year for a podcast that started way back in 2017.
And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we round up a bunch of feedback over the last couple of weeks, including what people did with their podcast over the holiday break.
Lauren, I missed you over the holiday break. Start the show now.
Welcome to Better Podcasting. With a combined history of over 1,000 episodes and starting as early as 2008, we are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast. Here are the hosts for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
3, 2, 1, record.
All right, we're starting that one over. aren't we?
Obviously we are. I can pull it from the stream, but I wouldn't have your local. Aren't you glad we noticed now?
Yes, I am.
And actually, you know what? Why is it not going? Hold on. Speak again.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Check, test. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Oh God, I hope
talking-
my tracks were armed the other day. Well, might be a solo track show. We'll find out about that.
Well, if you need my away track, I can send that.
Well, we'll find out. I think I did. I'm pretty sure I did arm them. Can you talk again?
Testing, 1, 2, 3. We are doing an audio test after we started the show because we were so revved up to start 2020 with Barbara Walters that we did not press record. A rare occasion on Better Podcasting.
On record.
Bangs, he always forgets to press record. Always.
There we go.
There is hardly a week where Dave Jackson does not start record. I mean, sometimes he catches it, but
Shall we do this?
yes. Welcome to episode 214 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we talk about what makes a likable podcast host.
In this week's Better Podcasting Download, we discuss a breakout year. Oh my God. One more time. One more time.
Slow clap.
Are you ready?
I am. Welcome to episode 214 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we talk about what makes a likable podcast host.
In this week's Better Podcasting Download, we discuss a breakout year for a podcast that started way back in 2017.
And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we round up a bunch of feedback over the last couple of weeks, including what people did with their podcast over the holiday break.
Lauren, I missed you over the holiday break. Start the show now.
Welcome to Better Podcasting. With a combined history of over 1,000 episodes and starting as early as 2008, we are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast. Here are the hosts for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Welcome to your first episode of Better Podcasting for 2020. I am Stephen John Drew. I'm pleased to say that SP is back podcasting with me again this year. It's weird.
We debated on whether or not we were going to continue Better Podcasting together, and we decided, let's do it again. Let's roll the dice for one more year. So we did. But as Stephen alluded to, we're just coming off the holiday break, and some of us have received podcasting gifts over the holidays. So I just wanted to go over one that I received. I received a new microphone. Yeah, everybody's talking about that Samsung Q9 that's out in CES right now, and this is what I have. Yes, a Telex desktop microphone. I got this. Steven, my worries are over as far as recording podcasts. I've got this new microphone.
For those of you who are wondering what a Telex microphone is, it's actually a special X-Men edition of a Teletubby microphone. That's what it is. It's a combination. It's a crossover.
I'm not even sure what this was supposed to be used for back in the day, maybe gaming or something like that. But yeah, I've used it. I think there are better microphones out there. But Stephen, I also got another great podcasting gift. I know you're really excited about this one. I got a Blue Yeti.
For the audio listener, he's not talking about a Blue Yeti microphone. He's literally holding up a color blue Yeti tumbler. If you haven't checked out the show recently, sorry, let me do that again. If this is the first time checking out this show, you might not know that I made that same joke about 3 years ago when I got my Yeti, which is not a blue Yeti. It is an orange Yeti.
3 years ago. It was like a year ago. And yeah, it wasn't a blue Yeti. It was orange. I have a blue Yeti, and I have prevented myself from using this until we actually got to show it on this show. Yes, it's a brand new Blue Yeti, which I will be using on Better Podcasting, just not in the manner which everybody else would be thinking. Yes. So, Stephen, did you get anything that you want to tell the troops about?
No. Yeah, of course
Okay.
I did. I did. I actually got a variety of different things, and I'm not going to get into a bunch of them, but a lot of experimenting for me this year, part of which is acoustic tiles, which the one that I'm holding up for the audio listener has not done its inflation process, so it's pretty useless. But I'm looking forward to experimenting with those. I actually got a couple packs of those from a couple different people because we talked about sound treating your room, and we've got limited experience with that, but it's an area of my personal firsthand knowledge and experience of tinkering that I really wanted to learn a little bit more about. So that was on my wish list, and some people were kind enough to oblige, and a bunch of other things that we'll save for the end of the year when we do our gear episode. Maybe I'll touch on it here and there over the next little while, but definitely I'm experimenting this year, SP. I'm experimenting.
Experiment every year. By the way, we usually start our podcast with a How I Saved My Podcast story. We're not going to start it off with a How I Saved My Podcast story this week. However, we did run into, I ran into an excellent clip. I've been talking about how I watch these sailing YouTube channels, these cruising YouTube channels, and they are creators just like us. In a lot of cases, they're hobbyists, although they are trying to make money, so they continue to cruise around the world, and I'm very envious of them. Also, it's a lot of work that they do, and there was a question in one of their live streams over the holidays of how would you recommend to somebody or give them advice about starting a YouTube channel, which is very similar to a hobby podcast. It's not exactly one for one. And the answer was intriguing enough that I reached out to the creators. It's Tula's Endless Summer. And I asked permission to roll this clip. And this is what they had to say.
What else?
What is your best advice to start a YouTube channel?
Don't do it to make money.
Yeah. Don't do it to make money. My best advice, I got one piece of advice. I
Do it
concluded
for
it
yourself.
recently. Be different. Whatever you see on YouTube, just try to be super different. And that's not, that's what I have to say about that.
And do it for yourself. Do it for your family. Do it for your friends. Don't do it to try to make money.
Do it to satisfy your creativity. Yep.
That sounded eerily familiar to some of the things that we've said on here before, SP. All kidding aside, I loved it when you sent this to me. You sent this to me a couple of weeks ago. We still talk while we're not podcasting together. We still talk. We got a good relationship. It's part of the contract, but
It's more texting than talking.
That's fair enough. And when you send that to me, I'm like, this is so familiar. I'm so glad that you found this because it just goes to show that podcasting is not unique in some ways, and it's important to remember that because YouTube's been around. We've all sorts of people have built YouTube channels over the years, and now we're really seeing that balloon of podcasting and people trying to get into podcasting, and YouTube's gone through that. YouTube's done that. It's come and it's gone, And so it's coming back again. And so I think that this is really good example on how we can learn a little bit from other crafts that are very similar to ours.
I just want to extend a special thanks to Bill and Sierra over on Tula's Endless Summer for providing us the permission to play this on Better Podcasting. They said they were going to check the show out, and if you guys did, thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing your adventures as you're sailing north this season.
I didn't know if we were going to roll into the thing. We're going to roll into the thing.
Yeah, why not?
Sorry, I had other notes going too. I'm still balanced, getting back in the saddle, trying to make sure there's some.
I had committed to the strategic pause, so I'm like, okay, well, I'm just gonna go with it.
I'm just writing this down now.
I would.
I am.
Future Steven's gonna really appreciate that.
I'm sorry, I'm off today. You know why I'm off today? Because
you haven't had your SP fix in a couple of weeks.
It's because Harry and Meghan, they've thrown me off. My
Meghan
dreams.
Markle.
I know. I'm crushed. They're getting out of the royal family.
All right.
It's heartbreaking, SP.
Let's pontificate here. There's two things going on. First of all, I think that Meghan just didn't want to give up her film career. So, they're breaking with the royal family so they could go off and she could make her own money back as an actor. So I think that's one. I think that's one very serious thing. The other thing Stephen brought up in a private chat a little while ago is that they feel like they want to start a podcast and they want to make money that way. So I think they're going to enlist the consulting and production expertise of the GonnaGeek.com network. And we are going to have the royal couple on. And I don't think it's going to fit in with our content, but it'll be fun producing with them.
Hope you got yourself a good lawyer because you signed an NDA on that one, SP.
Damn it.
When it comes down to it, podcasts are largely about the hosts, the topics, the actors, and the stories within each podcast episode. Often the topic and information that's presented are the initial draws to that podcast, especially for new listeners. But what keeps listeners coming back and subscribed is how much the audience likes the hosts of those shows. It's worth noting that audio dramas are a slightly different animal with respect to host likability, but ultimately the likability factor is still important for the main actors of those audio dramas. As SP and I open our 2020 Better Podcasting year, we'd like to try to do an episode that will hopefully help you make your podcast a little bit better by hopefully making your hosting a little bit more likable. A likable host will help more new listeners stay and possibly turn those frequent listeners into longer term subscribers and maybe even encourage them to interact with you a little bit more as they start to like you, or in the case of everybody listening to this show, love SP.
As far as likability, there's no one size fits all formula when you're talking about likability with a podcast host. After all, it's mostly subjective. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But today, we want to describe some common attributes and qualities that contribute to a host's likability. The more you can genuinely incorporate these attributes, which we're about to go through, into how you host a podcast, the more potential you have to be likable to your listeners. While preparing for this episode, I actually asked the Better Podcasting Discord members what makes a likable host. There was one attribute that Aluran, he's a user on the Discord server, aka Jason from the Smoking and Drinking in Space podcast, he brought it up, and we wanted to mention this attribute right off the bat, and that is hosts with beards. While this is obviously not an attribute every host can have, should have, or even would want to have, we thought we'd mention it because at the time of recording this episode, we both have beards. So thank you, Jason, for letting us know that you like us for our beards.
All right, SP, you've done your fan service to Jason. Can we just move on to some actual legitimate points?
All right. So we're glad you had a laugh with us on that last attribute, but it punctuates the first attribute that we wanted to bring up. Be prepared. In this case, one of the ways we prepared for this podcast was to ask our audience their thoughts on this topic. In doing so, we were able to take one of the responses, have a little fun with it, and use it as an example. But asking for audience feedback is not the only way to be prepared. Researching your specific topic or guest for the episode you are recording is a great way to be prepared. Sometimes you may take only a short time to prepare. Other times you might be working on a project for an extended period, maybe even over the course of several months. And yes, we've done some episodes here on Better Podcasting that we've researched for well over a year. Taking care of your health on the addition, in particular your voice, is a great way to also be prepared. Your voice might be a host's greatest podcasting asset after all. Without your voice, it's pretty difficult to record a podcast. If you're sick, if you've got laryngitis, you know what I'm talking about. And if you've been podcasting for any extended period of time, you probably had a situation where you've had to podcast while you've been a little under the weather. In these situations, you could prepare for the challenges, such as having extra water on hand, having throat lozenges, or breaking up your recording to several recording sessions so you can give your voice a little rest, clear your throat, and move on and sound as normal as you possibly can with your cold or flu. Now, knowing what you want to say during your episode is also a great way to be prepared, perhaps the biggest way to be prepared. Coming prepared means that you will use less crutch words because you know what you're actually going to say. You will communicate information you want to your listeners and to your community. You won't give extraneous information that might not be important or might take a sidetrack that you don't want to take during your show. And your listeners are going to appreciate that you are respecting their time. You also have preventing falling into that trap of talking in circles as you try to make it sound like you know what you're talking about. Coming prepared to record your show will ultimately translate into audience respect and maybe even entice listeners to like you. But preparedness is not the only attribute by far that we're going to be talking about today.
No, the next one we want to talk about is respect. When you're a communicator like a podcaster, the respect you show your audience, your guests, the topic, and the people that you are discussing really can enhance that listener likability. When you're not respecting others, your audience might start to not respect you. And when your audience doesn't respect you, they may not want to listen anymore. Now, your show doesn't have to be 100% agreement with all hosts, guests, and listeners all the time. No, it doesn't have to be all sunshine and roses. It's not necessarily having to be the case. But you can present multiple different opinions and even have debates in a very respectful manner. It's possible to do this. Now, your audience has a lot of choices of different shows that they can listen to, generally within your niche. Sorry, you're not always unique, but the odds are they're going to want to choose a show that does exhibit respect over a show that doesn't exhibit respect. Like, think about that. If there's two potential options, they're pretty much the same, and one of them sounds like they're having a respectful debate, and the other is just being completely disrespectful, which would you prefer to listen to? Try to be the show that is the one that has the respect, and your audience will probably appreciate that. Now, here's the fun fact of this point here. If you're ever trying to think of our list and you're like, oh, I really want to improve my likability, I can't remember that second one they said. Just do what SP does, because I know for a fact that the way that SP drills this category into his head is that he hits up all of the different karaoke bars every Friday night, sometimes including Saturday nights, and he sings the song. Yeah, that's what he does, is he sings respect every Friday at a karaoke bar as he thinks about this topic.
It's true. It just starts with me just trying to spell respect, and it just snowballs from there. I got to go out and sing it. Absolutely. Moving on to the next quality or attribute of being a likable host. At some level, your show has to be entertaining to your audience. Now, this does not mean that you have to tell wall-to-wall jokes or be in constant storytelling mode. However, it does mean that you need to present somewhat of a show to your listeners. You have to entertain. And no one wants to listen to a podcast that just reads the dictionary. Even shows that actually do read the dictionary, listeners to that generally want more. Listeners want to be intrigued with how the information or story is being presented. This means that as a host, you are some sort of an entertainer on some level. To use an analogy, even teachers in schools will agree with this. And students, at least me as a student, will definitely agree with this. You want to be entertained as you're learning. So make your show as entertaining as it needs to be by being entertaining as a host. If you need to tell some jokes, tell some jokes. If you need to tell a captivating story, tell that captivating story. Sure, enhanced production elements and editing can help with this, but at the end of the day, how entertaining your show is depends on how entertaining you are as a host on the microphone when you are recording. For one thing, talking in monotone for an hour is not entertaining. Monotone dialogue might help some listeners fall asleep, and there are podcasts meant for this purpose, but most podcast hosts are trying to communicate to their audience and having proper inflection to your voice and engaging vocal cadence over the course of your show helps you entertain your audience. If you're having trouble with this, consider taking an improv class or take some opportunities to present to small groups as a public speaker. Local Rotary Club meetings are great places to practice this and network. The more you practice, the better you'll become. Also, review your podcast episodes and critique yourself on how entertaining you think you are as the podcast is released 3, 6, 12 months later. Take notes on your performance and make changes in your next episodes. But the bottom line with all this, strive to be entertaining. Your podcast audience will thank you for it through their downloads, streams, and subscriptions.
Another way you might find yourself being a little bit more likable is when you have a little bit of knowledge sprinkled through your show. Now, as a host, you do not want to be the authority on your topic, but you do need to know enough to be able to communicate that topic that you're covering for your podcast. This is why it's important to choose a podcast show general topic that you've got a passion about. For example, Better Podcasting, episode 1 will relate you all to that information about how you want to pick your topic. Yeah, that's the first thing we ever did. And partially because we're passionate about that topic as well. If you're an expert in the topic you're covering, that is a good attribute that you can have for your show. But if you're not an expert, you'll still need to share some of that knowledge by spending time researching the topic enough to be able to provide some value to the listener. Give you a little bit of a secret. Even audio drama script writers do need to research their topic a little bit and their stories. They need to do research on stories and facts and locations, personalities to make sure it does come across as authentic. If you're a podcast host without the proper knowledge, your audience is probably going to wonder why they're listening to you talk about something that you're not knowledgeable about over a show where clearly they do have a little bit of knowledge and experience that they can talk about. With the proper knowledge, your audience will thank you by wanting more of the same. Your audience will like you for your communication of said knowledge and hopefully relate a little bit because obviously they're listening to that show because they also want a little bit of knowledge about that topic. Now, here's one cautionary moment that we've got to do with sharing knowledge. You don't want to overload your audience with all sorts of facts, especially if these facts aren't created with content. Oh, write down that edit point. With content. I should make a new word.
With content. Yeah, why not? I mean, we could have run with it. You could have actually dubbed yourself saying the real word.
You're right. I could. I've done it before actually on the show. Especially facts without context. Instead, pick the most relevant facts in relation to what you're talking about so that you can better help tell the story. Essentially, you're sprinkling in those facts within the general story. If you want a good example of this, let's give a special shout out here to former guest of the show, fellow Gonna Geek Network member, Cody Goff and the Curiosity Daily podcast. Over there, they're a fact show. They're all about talking about daily nuggets of knowledge, him and his co-host, Ashley Hamer. Well, here's the thing. They don't just go and deliver 10 minutes of raw facts every episode. No, they do tell a little bit of a story. They essentially add that sort of element of knowledge in with the facts so that it's a nice balance and you're not feeling overloaded with just pure raw facts at the end of those 10 minutes. They do a really good job. And if you want to sort of hear how they balance that, I think it's a good example on how you can do that because they're a fact podcast.
And they intertwine puns and entertainment. Matter of fact, today they were talking all about horsepower, and there was a bunch of horse puns in there, even ones that didn't make sense. But that's part of their shtick. It works. So let's move on to another attribute of being a likable host, and that's having passion. I mean, we talked about it a little bit when we were talking about the topic before, but passion warrants its own host likability discussion on this show. If a listener is interested in your show's topic or story, what will help set your show apart from others is the passion you portray on the microphone. As a warning, you can go too far with passion, and this is a tricky attribute because depending on your audience, the level of passion you have could be appropriate, not enough, or too much. The key is to ensure the passion you have on your show is genuine. False or feigned interest is pretty easy to spot for a listener, so don't force yourself to be too passionate. Also, obsessive passion can be off-putting to most listeners that might consider you to be, quite frankly, off your rocker. So be careful to balance your passion with a dose of realism, and you will maintain your likability as a podcast host to your audience. And also, as an additional word of caution, don't let your passion make you incoherent. Sometimes if you talk too passionately, you might only be talking to yourself in your head because we can't understand what you're saying.
Fair enough. I do that a lot. The next section that we want to talk about is being appreciative. Being thankful or appreciative to your audience and guests can potentially make you a little bit more likable to your listeners. Everyone likes a friend, a coworker, a dinner guest that really expresses that appreciation, and podcast audiences like that too. For example, how much do I appreciate the wonderfulness that is the beard that SP can grow? I talk about it all the time on this show because it's quite a powerful beard. Even our audio listeners who don't check out the video ever, they know how appreciative I am of SP's beard.
It's the only thing you're appreciative of me about is the beard, and it's only here half a year.
But seriously, appreciation can be something that does connect a little bit with your audience, and make sure you are being appreciative when appropriate and that you're not thanking everybody too much, because sometimes if you overdo that, like us Canadians do, it kind of waters down that appreciation a little bit. A little goes a long way with appreciation, but sometimes a lot seems a little bit like you just don't actually care because you're just using it willy-nilly. In the end, podcast listeners want to know you do care, and if you do care by being thankful, your audience might like you for that. Again, SP, your beard, I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, right? Moving on to the next attribute, and the second to last attribute that we're going to talk about is storytelling. Now, storytelling is a little different than being entertaining. I know I mentioned it before, and it is enough of an attribute for us to discuss storytelling as a separate likable attribute. So we're going to do that right now. In fact, storytelling could be its own Better Podcasting episode all by itself. If you've never been trained in the art of storytelling, or it doesn't come natural to you, spend a few minutes researching how to tell stories better and then practice that knowledge off microphone. In short, though, different parts of a good storytelling include timing, setting the scene, tension, and delivering the ending, or if it's a joke, punchline. Nearly everyone likes to listen to a good story, and if you are able to tell stories well, it will help your listeners like you as a podcast host. I sense a future episode of Better Podcasting on this topic.
Now, we're going to go into some things that we think might reduce your likability, but before we get there, we created a special notes category for this next thing because we know that if we were to talk about this next thing
Back up.
Oh, I did. Shoot, I missed that one. I scrolled too far. Here, you go ahead and take the next one.
Okay.
Just go ahead and move on to the next one.
Yeah. And finally, the last positive attribute or quality that we're going to talk about being a likable podcast host. Talked about a little bit before about being genuine. We're going to call it authenticity. And it's arguably the most important one we're going to talk about today. Very few podcast listeners want to listen to a host that is a character, unless you're talking about a produced audio drama. So we'll just drop that part off and we'll just go to what we're doing here, kind of the Talking Head podcast. Instead, most podcast listeners want to experience a genuine person recording into a microphone. This is one of the main differences that sets podcasting apart from radio in the early days and even continuing on into today. Just by being yourself, you've already increased Just by being yourself, you've already increased your chances of being likable to your audience. So be yourself, and chances are that you will already be liked by someone.
Now we're going to move on here to a couple of things that we think might reduce your likability factor. But before we get there, we created this in the middle thing called special notes, because we know that if we said that it was just for sure making you non-likable, people would argue all sorts of different examples. And we're talking about profanity, because we'd be remiss if we didn't cover this in some aspect and some relation to profanity. In the world of podcasting, this is a very, very hot topic. And actually, if you think about it, through the whole world, this is a bit of a hot topic, the concept of profanity. This is because there are different levels of profanity that are looked at in different manners and differently throughout the world. Heck, there are even some differences within just individual countries. One side of the country might see something, or one part of the country might see something as being profanity while the other doesn't. So profanity inherently is really a hot topic. And there are some certain types of shows that do use profanity where it's easier accepted than others where profanity could potentially make you a little bit non-likable. But here's the thing. Because profanity can, for some listeners, be a make or break situation for some listeners, potentially if you use that, you may no longer be likable to some potential listeners. And for these listeners who do look at profanity through those eyes, it can be potentially one of those situations where you just can't unring that bell. I'm going to use a bit of a weird example that I think some people will appreciate, especially those who grew up with this show. Let's talk none other than Bob Saget. You know, Danny Tanner from Full House. There was an entire generation, maybe even multiple generations, who first knew Bob Saget as that wholesome, quirky Danny Tanner. He was the sweater-loving, nerdy dad from Full House. But there was a point, mostly when internet surely evolved, that some of these Full House viewers started to see Bob Saget's comedy. And guess what? Bob Saget's comedy is not Full House. No, a lot of people, when they first saw this, I had personal encounters with several people who first saw his comedy and they're like, whoa, what is this? Because he is a little bit crude in his comedy, a lot crude. And once people saw that, they just couldn't see Bob Saget on Full House in the same manner. So it's just a little bit of an example how sometimes when you see somebody in a certain light, you might not see them the same way. And for some people, the truth of the matter is, for some individuals, once they hear somebody use profanity in a certain way, they judge them and they think of them differently.
And while we're talking about a way that people might find you as a host unlikable, let's talk about a couple more that we think are potential ways that you might not be likable to a listener. Let's start with being condescending. There's a big difference between being knowledgeable and confident or being condescending. Often when someone uses a condescending tone or nature, it can make the person they're talking to become defensive or worse, feel stupid. I'm feeling eye rolls already as I'm talking about this. It's important to remember that you're having an intimate conversation with your audience as a podcast host. And even if you're being condescending with or about someone else, ultimately to your listener, they see you as talking directly to them. Sometimes this can lead to them feeling that you're being condescending to them. All right. And if your podcast is being left feeling stupid, they might check out. I personally don't want to listen to a half hour of feeling stupid, so I don't listen to podcast hosts that are condescending. Maybe that's your thing, but as a podcast host, if you want to maximize likability, stay away from being condescending.
You did a terrible job of that, SP. You just like completely rushed that section. It was terrible. What are you thinking? How long have you been doing this? It's 214 episodes. Anyways, let's move on to the next one.
Please do. You
Yeah.
usually talk about this
Yeah.
after the show.
Yeah. Oh, the next category is being berating. Oh, this is awkward now. Very awkward. No,
Stepped in it again, Stephen.
kidding aside, being condescending can be really bad, but sometimes taking it a step further to the berating level can make it worse. This can be berating somebody on your show, like the example I just did, off the show, maybe somebody who's not on the show, like a guest or somebody that you... Oh, hold on, let me do that again. Somebody who's off the show, maybe somebody that's not actually hosting the show, but you're talking about them on the show, or potentially you could even be berating your listener. I know what you're saying. You're like, well, how can you really berate a listener if it's just really a one-sided conversation? Well, there are some ways that you can do this, and sometimes if you're not meaning to, you can actually indirectly berate them. For example, let's say that you've got a podcast all about paint drying. You start to tell a story on that paint drying podcast about a recent experience that you had with your friend who just didn't know that latex paint dries a lot faster than oil paint. During your telling of this story, you berate your friend, putting them down, calling him names, and just generally bad-mouthing their sheer stupidity for not knowing this. What happens to that listener that you have who's come to your show to learn all about paint drying and learn about these things, and they also didn't know this? Perhaps they relate with your friend. So now as they listen, they're kind of
January 8th, everyone. January 8th.
Long year, gonna be a long year.
Picking up where we left off.
It's like we never left. So as they listen, they actually identify with your friend, essentially feeling like you're berating them because they're hearing all of the berating you're doing about your friend, but they are identifying with them. Would that listener really want to keep listening if they feel like every time they come to your show, they're going to be left feeling a little bit berated? Probably not. But legal disclaimer here, actual paint drying times do vary depending on a variety of circumstances. We recommend you consult with your local experts and the side of the paint tin before you factor in how long your paint will dry.
Is that what they call it in Canada? Tins?
Yes, that's it. That is, yes.
We call them paint buckets here.
Well,
Or-
anyways, that's because you overdo
Cans.
everything down in America. Continue with our next point here.
Of course, there are actually direct ways to berate a listener too. For example, if you talk about feedback communication you had with somebody, and you talk about that in a berating manner on your show, that's going to be a direct beration. And keep in mind that while you may be willing to part with the specific listener you've chosen to berate, you could also be discouraging other listeners from engaging with you in the future, or heck, just listening to your show to begin with. They may not want to risk being publicly berated like that other listener that you did. We do want to say that there are specific types of podcasts where some of these could potentially be part of your show. I mean, think about mainstream media for a second. There are probably some very unique examples of the following things where it has been a success formula for some people. However, as we go through these, you should also consider there were probably people turned off of these shows too and were driven away from them. And a good example is Howard Stern back in the day. I actually never listened to Howard Stern on a regular basis. While there were people that loved him, there were people who hated him too. And guess what? Howard Stern actually has done interviews since where he regrets some of the ways how he used to act. He had a pretty emotional discussion with David Letterman on season 1 of Letterman's My Next Guest Needs No Introduction. I heard that was, I never watched that one, Stephen, but I heard that was a key mark of the Letterman show on that. And it really painted Howard Stern in a different light.
It did. In summary, being likable is very subjective. It really is. Think about all the experiences that you've had with your spouse. There was probably a time that you had a conversation about a famous person that one of you loved and the other couldn't stand. This is a great example on how being likable is subjective. One of you found this individual to be likable while the other person in the relationship couldn't stand them. So while you won't possibly be likable 100% of the time to 100% of the people listening to your show, the more ways that you can make yourself likable, the higher chances that you have that you will at least check enough of those likable check mark boxes that the listener will want to keep listening to your show, even if there's a couple of things that they don't necessarily love about you. But here's the thing. Remember a second ago when we gave an example there about how likability was subjective? Yes, well, that legitimately was an example about how likability was being subjective. Here's the thing. The way we delivered that was actually the true example of likability being subjective. Because what I just told you to do was think about a story that you could relate with your spouse. There's probably a portion of our audience right now that is listening to this and they related to that and they had no problem and they instantly thought of what we were talking about. But there was also a portion of our audience that probably went, wait, I don't have a spouse. You see, subjective. And there's probably at least one of those people who thought that blatantly thought that we forgot about them and that we just ignored them and we just disregarded them. For a moment, we were not likable. For a moment, we were not likable to that individual or those individuals. So we really just wanted to do that to highlight likability. It's very subjective, and we hope that today's episode helps you think about all of the fantastic things that you do with your podcast to make yourself likable, and maybe consider some of the things that you can do just to enhance that a little bit. We know that you're a likable person because you're listening to Stargate Pioneer, and how can you not be likable when you listen to Stargate Pioneer on a regular basis?
Being likable generally means you're going to have a better connection with your audience, and that's what you're striving for as a podcaster. I'm going to throw it out to you, our listener. Did we miss a key attribute to likability or dislikability? Did we hit one that you feel you need to work on yourself? Did you hit one that you feel like is more important than the others? Let us know. We got that Discord server we always talk about at betterpodcasting.com/Discord, or you can always reach out to us on our email at podcast@betterpodcasting.com.
This is the Better Podcasting Download.
An interesting article crossed my desk over the past couple of weeks here, and it was actually the stats to Darknet Diaries. Now, it's hosted by Jack Rydster. I'm sorry, Jack. I never can pronounce your last name, and it's a badge of honor on this show or any show I'm at because I tend to butcher names quite a bit. Jack, I'm very sorry. Anyway,
fun fact: my last name is actually Jandrew, but I just went with John Drew because he missaid it all the time.
Sure, we'll go with that. You started with that name long before I became part of your podcast world. So, and it was the name that you and your brother were given. So I don't know. Anyway, the Darknet Diaries is a podcast that covers true stories from the dark side of the internet. Now, stories about hackers, defenders, threats, malware, botnets, breaches, and privacy. Talking about internet stuff. And it started in 2017. At the end of 2019, Jack shared his stats from 2019, and he literally just shared them all. I don't know where he got his stats from. I don't think it says in the article, or I just glossed over it. But you clearly see in the article his release dates have spikes to them. That's pretty common among episodes that are like weekly or monthly. You'll get a spike on release day. And then you'll have some continual low chatter of people downloading your back catalog throughout the rest of the week or month. And in this case, it's weekly. Now, he went through the entire year. He annotated different things that did and did not happen with his show to create growth. He showed the growth that his show achieved, which is basically going from about 40,000 downloads on the days that he released to 100,000 downloads. So a 150% increase basically in the podcast. That is tremendous growth when you're talking about podcasting, not necessarily hockey stick growth, but still tremendous growth. one thing was pretty noted in here, and it's interesting to me on this. We had a side discussion on it, Stephen. It was that when he won an award, it had no bearing whatsoever on his downloads. There was no increase anywhere around when that award came. So that was interesting to note. But there were other things that was interesting to note as well. Like whenever he appeared on another podcast, he tended to note some bumps around there. And then whenever he was listed in articles, he had seen some bumps to there. And it wasn't just one thing. It was continual things throughout the year. And again, I'm going to note, this is the third year of operation. He began operations in 2017 on this particular podcast. 2017 was first year. 2018 is second year. 2019 was the third year. So it took him until 2019 to get that big growth. So Stephen, did you have a chance to take a look at this article?
I did, and one of the things that I found really interesting about that was that his downloads increased quite a bit when he switched over to SoundCloud. I thought that was I'm joking, completely joking.
Yeah, you're right, because
joking.
it was an Anchor.
That's right. Yeah. No, this is really, really interesting, and I think worth hobby podcasters taking a look at, because there's a really good breakdown on sort of the things that he saw that spike and the things that he didn't. And as a hobby podcaster, you got a very limited amount of budget and time that you can focus on your podcast. And this might help give you a little bit of direction on where you do want to place your focus to hopefully get a little bit of growth. The awards thing is a great example that you said there, because you and I both have talked to a variety of people who have won awards over the years. And we've known this. We've known that a lot of people don't really see a bit of a spike with this. And so a lot of people who do hobby podcasts, immediately they think, well, if I become award-winning podcaster, then maybe I'll end up having more clout, which means more people listening. And the example here says that that's not the case. And there's a lot of work that goes into trying to win an award. So maybe you want to focus a little bit elsewise if you're thinking that's going to be your priority to grow listeners. So really good information in here, and I really do encourage people to check that out. I really like the breakdown of this.
And we're not saying awards are bad. We're just saying that they don't necessarily attribute to podcast growth. There are other reasons why you would want to win an award. Maybe you like the recognition. Maybe if you're working for a company, and we're not talking about corporate podcasts here on the show, we talk about hobby podcasts. But if you're working for somebody else, it's always great to show an award, to show viability. So there are reasons to win an award, but for hobby podcasters, we're saying that you might want to focus elsewhere to increase your growth and not necessarily on the awards. Now,
sorry, I thought, my bad.
No, that's good.
No, that's fine. Are you good?
Nope.
Are you sure? Okay. All right.
I am sure.
Okay.
This is where we here at Better Podcasting turn the show over to you as we run through some of your feedback. We call this segment Better Podback.
Well, if we're going to do an episode all about likability, you can bet we're going to ask people about what they think makes podcast hosts likability. And we did a poll over on Twitter. Yeah, if you don't follow us on twitter.com/betterpod, you should, because occasionally we do a poll. And we asked the question, podcast hosts and co-hosts are very likable to me when I, brackets, and let us know what you think and reply to. And then we listed the following options. So either they relate to them, laugh at their jokes, respect their knowledge, or like their storytelling. And it was interesting because I'll say generally it was divided. The highest category that we had was respect their knowledge at 38%. We had relate to them being 28%. We had like their storytelling being 19%. And laugh at their jokes being 14%. So really interesting to see the way that this was divided, but definitely respect their knowledge and relate to them were the takeaways here out of this. Now, these were just a few categories that we put because Twitter polls are limited, but I definitely think that relating to a host is a great way to like them because, again, you relate to them. You have common ground.
By the voting numbers, it was divided, as you said. by the voting numbers, as you said, it was pretty divided, but we also received multiple responses on, can there be a write-in option for all of the above? Yeah, there was several people that said all of the above, and that is fine too. That's why we asked for people to write in what they were thinking in terms of an answer there. I think the 4 things that Stephen chose to put on that poll were, yeah, you would expect that to be equal. I think knowledge came out on top a little bit more than the others. So I think that is what our audience at Better Podcasting is striving for. That's not indicative of all podcasting. Keep that in mind. But we also received a interesting response from Restoration Pod. And Restoration Pod, or Resonant Restoration, said, replying to Better Pod, it definitely depends on the topic or theme of the podcast. I enjoy confidence on the presentation, knowledge or modesty when approaching a subject that they are not knowledgeable, and an engaging cadence when telling their views or story. It's all interconnected. And yeah, I would say that many of the attributes and qualities that we talked about in today's show are interconnected indeed.
We also had AL Moral in our Discord say, late to the party, but I like hosts who are happy to share with their audience, whether that's sharing their knowledge, their passion, their humor, their personality, or whatever. That's not to say everyone has to be bubbly. I just think you can tell by the way someone hosts whether or not they're having a good time. If they're not having a good time recording it, then I probably won't have a good time listening to it. I think that's valid. That's valid. Nobody wants to listen for, 20 minutes to an hour or whatever it is that the person sounds like they're just suffering through or they phoned it in.
And Amanda hosts the Up to Your Ears podcast, and that's a really interesting podcast because they use a Fisher-Price xylophone to mimic some of the songs, because due to copyright, you can't play the song. So they do some really neat things over there, and the xylophone is just part of their shtick, right? It's entertaining listening to some of these rock stars or rock songs or classical songs just on a xylophone. It's pretty neat what they do over there on Up to Your Ears podcast. See, I do listen. Say I don't. So we also had another poll out there. Stephen was just bored and he was throwing all these polls out there. This was back on December 28th, and Stephen listed on our Twitter account, we hope you're enjoying your holidays, and are you using your time too? And tell us specifics in the replies. A, time off from podcasting. B, create new content. C, add new podcasting gear. D, upgrade show elements. Stephen, what were the results?
We had 100% of the vote say they were adding new podcast gear. That's what they said. No, that's not true.
That's what you hoped.
42% said create new content. 28% said time off from podcasting. 9% said add new podcasting gear. And the remainder at 20% said upgrade show elements. That was a fun little one to have. And we also had Chris Smith say, always keep on creating. We've talked a little bit before about how you can take a bit of a break off, in our opinion, but you can also keep working on your show.
We also had a reply from the Slick Boy Lounge, said, just trying to get back on track and produce regular episodes again for now. Upgrades coming soon, I hope. See, some people are just taking that time to enjoy the time off and create where they might have gotten behind in the holiday season. So I think that's pretty cool too, that they're able to do that. But he did mention wanting to upgrade gear. So I think you're getting your wish a little bit there, Steve.
Yes. Also, Play Comics said, officially, I guess I'll say that I'm taking time off, but I've really been low key getting some new projects going.
Yes, you can hear all about those new projects over on our Discord server, because Chris does the Play Comics podcast, which is part of the GonnaGeek.com network. We also had a reply from, and we're going to have to agree on how we're going to do this. Are we going to say the Twitter feed name, or are we going to say the name of the podcast?
Obviously, we're not going to break a tradition at this point.
All right. So we're going to go ahead with the Twitter name. It's not the name of the podcast. Say it with me, Stephen.
Aurelia Pod.
Also known as Adventures in Aurelia. This is from Damien. Damien said, I'm actually doing what I normally do right now. I only took one day off for each holiday filled with family stuff, so I'm not focusing any extra on one thing or another. I'm ready for 2020 though, and we're ready for you, Damien, to show us what you got in 2020. Damien, over the years, has really improved his podcast. Talk about better podcasting. He's gone from a simple tabletop streaming to one track. He's done multi-track. Now he's adding in show elements and bumps and background music and stuff like that. If you want to listen to the evolution of a podcast, Damien's show is phenomenal, especially if you're interested in D&D playthrough type podcasts. So we often joke about saying Aurelia Pod, but we do so affectionately. Damien, we're all about your show.
Actually, we're also about everybody else's show because we're committed. Because back on Christmas Day, we got a tweet that we responded to, and that's largely because we told our families that they have to wait and postpone Christmas because we needed to be at the phones in order to answer the listener and viewer feedback. That's what happened. And it was
I'm pretty sure Steven was just drunk.
maybe. It was from David Hawk, and he said, "Hello, I am wanting to make a podcast. I got a Snowball mic a while back because it was on sale, and I remembered hearing about that brand from a voice actor. I was wondering if this is a good starter mic for a 2-person tabletop gaming podcast. Thank you." Now, full disclosure, I was not near Twitter. It was all SP, so SP, take it away.
And if you ask me offline why it was available on Twitter Christmas Day, it wasn't, it's not normal. Anyway, the reply was a Snowball microphone is an omnidirectional condenser microphone. It will pick up your voices pretty well, but it will also pick up room reverb and ambient sounds as well. Even more so with poor microphone techniques, such as one mic for 2 people. It's good just to test things out, though. And I want to qualify what I said there at the end there. It's good just to test things out. If you are starting your podcast and you got the gear in front of you, try it out. See how you like actually recording a podcast. We often say record a test podcast, record 3 test podcasts. Part of that is testing out gear. If the gear's not working out for you, then you can go ahead and invest in some better gear or different gear, not necessarily better, but different gear that fits your requirements better. David responded to that and he said, "That's what I was worried about. Thank you for the fast response. Do you happen to know of any good mic sales at the moment?" Over the holidays, by the way, Stephen, there was a lot of microphone sales, but there was one in particular that we always have our eyes on.
That's the Samson Q2U, isn't it?
That is an incredible microphone for $40 or $45. And we just gave one away last episode, and that microphone is currently being shipped to Johan, who won it.
If you got something that you want to say to us, get in touch with us through any of the ways. You can tweet us at BetterPod or come over to our Discord server at betterpodcasting.com/Discord. You can email us podcast@betterpodcasting.com. And if you really, really feel great and want to do it, we would love to have a video clip from you. Please send us a video clip because we do have a full video companion to the show over at betterpodcasting.com. SP, that's going to take us to the end of our first 2020 episode. I got to say, I'm really excited for the things that we got to come for Better Podcasting this year. It's going to be a ton of fun. And I know I expressed my appreciation at the end of 2019 for podcasting with you, but I'll appreciate you right at the beginning here for more than your beard. I think that you and I have had a lot of fun conversations over the last couple of weeks, and I really appreciate your knowledge and being my soundboard and everything that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, because really we weren't podcasting together, and it's just fantastic having these conversations with you even when we're not seeing each other on a weekly basis.
Part of that was because Stephen was off rescuing his exterior Christmas decorations that were flying away in the wind. But part of it was because it was a great time every year for us to sit down and review our different projects that we got going on. Better Podcasting is one of them. And we often consult each other on our other projects that we have going on too. And it's a great time to do that. If you had a chance to do that over the holidays, let us know how that went. And I want to say I appreciate you, Stephen, very much. And one of the main things is the network and the fact that you create and maintain that website. That's a big part of Gonna Geek. Gonna Geek wouldn't exist without it. So thank you very much for doing that and all the production that you do on Better Podcasting and the GonnaGeek.com show. Stephen, I think I'm ready to go and plug my Blue Yeti and test it out.
All right, on that note, for episode 214 of Better Podcasting, I'm Stephen John Drew saying, I don't know that I'll ever get used to SP liking a Blue Yeti.
And I don't know if I'll ever get used to Steven at all. We'll
Bye.
see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the Gonna Geek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen John Drew of Gonna Geek Productions. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.
In the chat, okay. Here's one of the things that I really didn't want to bore people with. This is one of my I won't say favorite, but it is one of my favorite.
You don't really like my beard. You're just jealous of the beard.
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
No, one of my favorite things that I did get for Christmas over the for my podcast setup. Actually, I got another one right here. Hold on.
Yeah. Use that one instead. So I'm going to set this up here. Steven's often worried about the battery consumption of his lovely mic flag that his brother made for him. And he made an upgrade there.
So someone fulfilled my wish of a rechargeable 9-volt battery. So I got 2 of them.
Bravo.
So
instead of him running through about $100 every month Canadian for all those 9 volts, because that's what they cost in Canada, then he gets to just run through the rechargeables every year.
and you know the funny thing is, I totally left it on the other day after Gonna Geek.
Yeah.
I left it on and I came back down. I came back down about 2 hours later, and at first I was like, because I'm so used to kicking myself when I leave it on. I used to have a sign that I posted, and then I'm like, wait a minute, rechargeable. Yay.
I mean, especially if you're running off to make sure the kids are fed or not fighting or something like that. I mean,
That's true.
I could see you leaving on that mic flag a whole bunch. I will run out of here and talk to the families. They're running off to bed or whatever, and I'll leave the recording on. Who cares? The recording, right? It's only memory that I can delete later or whatever. But battery, once it's gone unless you got the rechargeable. So that's pretty cool.
There's a quick, we're going to go here in a second, but there was a question there about lav mics. Lav mics, they can work in certain situations. I would much prefer a handheld mic if you've got the ability for it. We both have used lav mics on various video projects on Gonna Geek YouTube channel and Gonna Geek Gear YouTube channel. They have suited a purpose, but I wouldn't want to record my show on a weekly basis with one probably.
So we've had this discussion quite a bit offline, and you're more of a pro for it than not of using lav mics. And honestly, it's because of your video background. I've been noticing a lot of posts on Reddit of people trying to do video and they want to get rid of the microphone. They want to go to the lav mics and stuff like that. And one of the things that we talk about all the time is the video shows, the news programs, the talk shows, whatever that use lav mics. They got several things going for them to make that possible. One of which is a bunch of live processing, noise gates and such like that they're able to monitor and reduce the crosstalk. Another thing is you don't see on camera, but a lot of them are using GAFT or I forget what it's called. You know, it's extended on the boom arm shotgun microphones that are just out of shot to also capture the sound. And it's not necessarily the lav mics that are capturing the sound. So it's not something that your average hobby podcaster is going to pick up. They just see the lav mics and they just go with it thinking that that's going to work to record separate tracks. And it's just not going to be that plausible without the high-end processing equipment that's in there before it goes to record.
Do you know what I like? If I wanted to go mic free, where I would spend my money is a shotgun microphone. If I was in the studio. Now, again, certain circumstances, if you're mobile, you might not get that. You might not have the luxury of being able to set that up in an ideal manner because a good shotgun microphone is going to take time getting it dialed in. That's what a good shotgun microphone is going to be. Now, here's the thing with shotgun microphones. Many of them are condenser microphones as well. So that's worth considering. Now they're refined. They're refined, and it's important to know that, but it's also important to note that they are often condenser microphones.
Right. But the more important part, even if they are condenser microphones, is they have a cardioid or a super cardioid pickup pattern. And that helps with them not picking up ambient sounds. They might pick up a little bit more ambient sounds than a dynamic shotgun microphone, but it's not going to be as bad as an omnidirectional Blue Yeti or Snowball.
But I would also skirt cheap. Like if I was to do that, I would not do a cheap shotgun microphone because
now what's cheap to you?
Under $100.
$100. I would say under 300.
Yeah, I would say, I think if you get over 100 US, you probably could find a balance with position and something just fell out. Position and acoustics and things like that. I think you could probably make it work. Like you could make some of the cheaper microphones we talk about, but under $100 for sure, it's going to not be that great. The Rode VideoMic Go is a great example of it not being great. I've tried to do a couple video projects with it. I will 9 times out of 10 pick my $30 lav mic if that's the situation that I need for the video project, because the sound is far superior than
we both have them.
Than the $80 whatever Rode VideoMic Go that I own. I've tried it in the kitchen. I've tried it in a workplace. I've tried it in the studio. I've tried multiple things where I've had actually the lav mic hooked up recording as well as the shotgun mic. And every single time I've preferred the audio from the lav mic. But again, if I was wanting to, and I was willing to spend the money, I would definitely go with the shotgun mic. One of the things also worth considering is the factors when you have a lav mic, the rustles, the things that might get in the way of the mic. A good example of this is watch the Jimmy Fallon show when he's got one of those water things going on where he's sitting in that tub getting ready to play water war with somebody. You can tell they use lav mics on that show because they have the lav mics, and as soon as they get dumped on, you hear the water on the microphone and then they sound muffled for the rest of that segment. And that's a problem because of the fact that there is stuff going on there. And you also sometimes hear it when, they pull the jacket off or whatever. These are considerations that you have to have if you have your microphone literally clipped to your lapel, is that you could potentially have rustle. So definitely, and other variables like breathing, and if you suddenly move your hand quickly and you're putting a pocket of air across that mic, there are things that come up. Which again, if I was really wanting to, I would get a shotgun microphone and I would place it probably right behind this camera, and I would spend a reasonable amount of money on it.
Yeah, and I'm constantly amazed at the sound quality that a lot of the YouTube sailing channels are able to get. I mean, they are not in the best audio quality environments, and they're not in the best gear environments either. I mean, they're basically in the worst of everything. Worst sound environments and worst weather environment with all the salt water and stuff like that. Just goes through equipment left, right, and backwards. Talking drones, cameras, and microphones, as well as computers. And they try to do the best they can with what they got without going overboard, because they're not making a ton of money, and their ultimate goal is just to cruise the world. And it's a small knit community too. They mostly know each other, but it always amazes me through post-processing the quality that they're able to achieve. But in almost every episode, there is some segment where you get the word "sorry about the microphone quality" or "sorry about the wind here," or they sound like they're 10 feet underwater because they processed it, whatever. As a podcaster and a podcast editor, I know exactly what's been going on behind the scenes to get to that point. But as a viewer, I'm just enjoying them, and I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm just enjoying the ride with you guys, sort of thing. But for a podcast, when you're only in somebody's ears, you got to pay attention to that audio quality. If you have video and audio, then you can rely on the video a little bit to pick up the slack of poor audio. But if you're only audio, it's got to be amazing content in order to actually publish poor audio.
All over on Twitch, by the way. We do have two things. Number one, something about Mike Flag. I'll come back to that. Second thing, have we reviewed the Go XLR? I have not. No. I think he's talking about Video
No.
Mic Go XLR. Is that what it is?
No, I
No.
think isn't that thing that's like the Rodecaster, and it had one XLR in. It's for streamers. The Go XLR. Bandrew's reviewed one.
Gotcha. Okay. As for the yeah, exactly, SP. Okay, as for the mic flag, yeah, there's a 9-volt battery right here. It's got an Arduino in it. So my brother has, in all fairness, he's offered to convert it over to USB power, but I'm like, no, I want a portable. And I'm also actually a little afraid of the power going right next to the mic cord. It should be okay,
Yeah,
but just to
and
be safe.
giving that feedback, and
Yeah. So anyways,
especially if those cords are in parallel.
actually, I don't know that since we made it, I've ever shown this. This was, by the way, a surprise for my birthday a couple years ago. It was fantastic.
If you went USB, you could use a little USB battery
That's true.
and recharge that versus the 9-volt.
Man.
But I mean, you got the rechargeable 9-volt. So
There's
who
actually-
cares?
It's hard to see because of this, but there's actually a second switch because he programmed so that if I want, I can make it static. And you notice how he did that too? He made it so when you flip the switch, it finishes the wave pattern.
Yeah. I'm surprised he hasn't made one that lights up and says David is the better
That's true.
John Drew brother,
And then also brightness. That's what this one's for. Brightness.
which is good because you're on camera.
Yeah. But
David's
anywho,
awesome.
uh
Hi, David, if you happen to be watching this.
let's go
How you doing?
ahead. We should head off though. Thanks everybody for coming on by. We'll be back next week. Keep your eyes on Twitter and all this other stuff for future streaming dates in case anything ever changes there. You never know.
I just want to acknowledge everybody in the chat that said it was a great show, learned a lot, that sort of
Yes.
things. Thank you, everybody, for those words. It means a lot to us to know that we're hitting the mark with the content. So thank you very much.
Look forward to next week when we do a featured segment on grooming your beard. Bye.
It's not a bad idea.